Hello, listeners. This is Menopause Taylor bringing you the state of menopause in the world today. And as you know, I talk to you about all things having to do with menopause, and one of the most important things is heart attacks. So I've been giving you podcasts on nothing but heart attacks for quite a while. So we're kind of in the middle of the unit, and we're in the part of the unit where I give you all the management options for preventing a heart attack. And so this talk today is on your dietary options for preventing a heart attack in the category, just one category of dietary options, high fiber. Now, you see, the reason this is important is because you've heard about fiber over and over again. You actually probably hear low fat, high fiber all the time. But even though you hear about that, most people still do all the wrong things when they attempt to eat a low fat, high fiber diet. And that is because you have very little guidance. You know, the food industry does everything possible to deceive you. And there isn't just any good health education out there to empower you with the knowledge you need. So what I do in my podcasts and my YouTube videos and all my educational resources is I get down to specifics. I want you to know all the ins and outs of making dietary choices that will meet your goals. So let's talk about fiber. Now, if you're sitting there thinking you already know all about fiber, I will be happy to wager a bet with you. You're probably going to be shocked out of your gourd with what you learned today. So listen to this podcast even if you think you know everything. Now, way back when, I gave you a great big long list of risk factors for a heart attack, and these risk factors are so important, and focusing on them is critical. And a lot of the risk factors have to do with lowering the fat in your diet. But this podcast is about lowering your risk for a heart attack by raising the fiber in your diet. And there isn't a specific risk factor specifically devoted to fiber in the list of risk factors for a heart attack. But it actually is included in one of the risk factors, but it's hidden. The risk factor that has to do with fiber, most importantly, is diabetes. But the others all have to do with fiber are actually the ones that have to do with fat too. So high, lousy LDL, your low, healthy HDL, your total cholesterol to HDL ratio, high triglycerides, high homocysteine level, and diabetes. They all have something to do with fiber. And the key is that you lower your risk for all of these factors by increasing the fiber in your diet. So let's just delve into fiber. And you know, I always start at the beginning. So I'm going to start with the definition of fiber. Fiber is also known as bulk or roughage. By definition, fiber is the structural part of a plant. You know, here's an analogy. Animals have a skeleton. The skeleton is what enables an animal to stand upright. Well, fiber is the skeleton of a plant. So fiber is what enables a plant to grow upright. Now, when you eat meat, do you eat the skeleton? Nope. But when you eat a plant, you do. And that's a good thing because the fiber offers huge benefits. Your body can't digest the skeleton of an animal, and it can't digest the fiber of a plant either. But the fact that you can't digest fiber is the very reason it's so beneficial. One of the biggest problems with fiber is that it's fraught with all these misconceptions. Most people tend to think of it as being only important for purposes of making your bowel movements regular. So fiber is marketed mostly to elderly people. That alone makes young people think they don't need fiber. But everyone needs fiber, and most people need a lot more fiber than they get. So I'll teach you what you need to know about fiber. The very first benefit of fiber is that it makes you feel full. Well, if you feel full faster, you're going to eat a lot less. And that's why some people think of fiber as bulk. It is bulk. The critical feature of fiber is that it must be whole grain. Whole grain means that the fiber surrounds the entire starch granule to form a kernel. It's not cracked, crushed, or adulterated in any way. The kernel is tough. It's like a kernel of popcorn before you pop it. Okay? A kernel of popcorn is hard. If you eat a kernel of popcorn, will you digest it? No, it'll go through your entire digestive tract whole. It's the whole kernel, the whole grain. So the key to fiber is to always eat the whole grain. And that's because the second benefit of fiber comes from the whole grain. Now, the problem is that the food industry has found every possible way to fool you. They write whole grain on all sorts of foods that do not contain whole grain. In fact, there are criteria for what the food industry is allowed to label whole grain. And would you believe that not one of them requires that the grain be whole? Think of that. Foods that list whole grains as the second or third ingredient may have as little as 1% whole grain. So when you're buying foods, always look at the ingredients. If the very, very first ingredient is not specifically whole grain, in quotes, whole grain, then it is not whole grain. And that brings us to the third benefit of fiber. If it is whole grain, it speeds up the transit time of food traveling through your digestive tract. Remember in the last podcast when I taught you about transit time? Transit time is the time it takes food to go from your mouth to your toilet. The faster the transit time, the more that food helps prevent a heart attack. And the more fiber you eat, the faster your transit time. That's why companies market fiber to old folks to keep them regular. Makes sense, doesn't it? Now, for the fourth benefit of fiber. You already know that you don't digest or absorb fiber, but you do digest and absorb all the other kinds of nutrients you eat. And the place where you absorb everything is your small intestine. So what happens is that fiber travels to your small intestine quickly, but instead of staying there to get absorbed like everything else, it keeps traveling on to your large intestine. And once it reaches your large intestine, there are no other nutrients around. But there are a bunch of bacteria. Your large intestine contains trillions of them. And when the fiber arrives at your large intestine, the bacteria have a heyday. Now, that may sound like a bad thing, but it isn't. It's a very good thing. Fiber is what your good gut bacteria love, and it's what your bad gut bacteria hate. So the fiber makes the good bacteria proliferate and the bad bacteria disappear. And the end result is that you get gas. Ha! Now, everybody hates gas, but gas is your friend. Gas is very healthy. You want gas. I mean, think about it. What kinds of foods give you gas? The healthiest ones. Fruit, vegetables, beans, nuts, and seeds, they all give you gas. I often say, the better your diet, the more you fart. My friends just shake their heads and roll their eyes when I say things like that, but it's the truth. The healthier your diet, the more you fart. Okay, here's the fifth benefit of fiber. It delays the absorption of fat. Now, don't make the mistake of confusing absorption time of nutrients into your bloodstream with the transit time of food through your digestive tract. The two are completely different things. You want slow absorption of nutrients into your bloodstream so that your liver doesn't get bombarded with too much all at one time. You especially want slow absorption of fat, which is very hard on your liver. But you want fast transit of food through your digestive tract so that it doesn't have time to leave behind waste products. You see, I like to think of it as the difference between a waste product spelled W-A-I-S-T and a waste product spelled W-A-S-T-E. Fat is a W-A-I-S-T product. It ends up around your waist. Fiber is a waste, W-A-S-T-E product. It isn't absorbed and it exits your body. Or here's another way to think of it. It's fat or fart. You can eat foods that turn into fat, or you can eat foods that turn into farts. Fat is bad, farts are good. Don't ask me how I come up with these things. My mind works in very strange ways. And if that helps you learn, then I'm happy. And now for the sixth benefit of fiber. Previously, I have taught you about how to read a nutrition label. And way back in one of my early videos, I actually did a color-coded nutrition label. And if you go to my YouTube channel, that was video number 118, and you really ought to look at it because it's a really easy way to learn how to read a nutrition label. And if you look at a nutrition label, you'll see a carbohydrate section. And when you look at the carbohydrate section, you'll see that there are two components to carbohydrates. There's fiber and there's sugar. Fiber is good and sugar is bad. So you want a lot of fiber and only a little sugar. And the key is to realize that you want the fiber to balance the sugar. So let's go back to basics. Think about fresh fruit. Fresh fruit is sweet. It's succulent. And that sweetness is sugar. So why is fruit good for you? I mean, if sugar is bad for you, why is fruit good for you? Because of the fiber. See, the fiber balances the sugar. That's the big ticket item right there. Naturally occurring sugars that are balanced by naturally occurring fiber do not have the harmful effects that other sugars have. So whenever you look at a nutrition label, you want to pay attention to the ratio between the fiber and the sugar. Previously, I've referred to this as the 5-to-1 rule. And the 5-to-1 rule is where you look at the number of grams of total carbohydrate on the nutrition label. And then you look at the number of grams of fiber. And what you do is you divide the total carbohydrate by the fiber. If the number is 5 or less, buy it. If the number is more than 5, put it back on the shelf. So if you have a total carbohydrate of 20 and your fiber is only 2, that's 10. Put it back on the shelf. But if you have a total carbohydrate of 20 and the fiber is 5, that's 4. 20 divided by 5 is 4. Buy that one. Remember, your total carbohydrate consists of only 2 things, fiber and sugar, which means that all the carbohydrates that are not fiber are sugar. Okay? So the goal is for the fiber to dominate the grams of carbohydrate. You want a high number for fiber, and you want a low number for the sugar. If the fiber balances the sugar in a 5-to-1 ratio, the food will decrease your risk of a heart attack. If the number you get when you divide the total carbohydrates by fiber is greater than 5, the food will not